Hello, and welcome to the KCSA Mental Health Virtual Investor Conference. My name is Allison Sauce, and on behalf of KCSA Strategic Communications, as well as our co-host, the OTC Markets Group, we're very pleased you have joined us for our next live presentation from Vistagen Therapeutics. Before I introduce our speaker, a few points to note. Please submit your questions in the question box to the left of the slides. If you are interested in scheduling a meeting with Vistagen, please click on the Meetings tab on the left navigation bar. You'll be able to view the company's availability and submit a meeting request. On a final note, all of today's presentations will be recorded and available for 24/7 replay. At this point, I am very pleased to welcome Sean Singh, CEO and Director of Vistagen Therapeutics, which trades on the Nasdaq under the symbol VTGN. Welcome, Sean.
Great, thank you, Allison, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to take a brief walk through Vistagen and highlight for you the key aspects of our pipeline, where we've been, where we're headed. We're very excited about what we've got in hand. We've got a world, unfortunately, in front of us where we're seeing anxiety and depression disorders skyrocket. Even pre-COVID, these were tremendous problems and challenges for the current standard of care. What we are focused on here is radically changing that standard of care, moving forward with drug candidates that have potential to work faster and to be significantly safer with a lot fewer side effects and safety concerns than what's currently out there for people wrestling with these very debilitating disorders. As is normally the case, I'll be walking through our slides and making significant forward-looking statements. So I encourage you to look at our SEC filings for further details about the risks relating to our business. As I mentioned, we're on a mission. We're on a mission to really answer the clarion call of people, millions of people in the U.S. who are struggling day to day with anxiety and depression disorders, namely social anxiety disorder and major depressive disorder. These are gigantic markets where even modest penetrations can make meaningful differences, not only to our shareholders, but obviously to people affected by these disorders. 23 is set up to be a pretty exciting year for us. We've got our lead program, PH94B, for social anxiety disorders in phase 3, and we hopefully will be moving into phase 2B for our second asset, PH10, in major depressive disorder. Third asset, AV101, we should see some interesting data there in other potential CNS indications. So fortunately, again, we're dealing with drug candidates that are different, fundamentally different, the way they work. We call that the mechanism of action, MOA for short. That just means that the way they work in the body is completely different from the currently approved drugs, and in a very positive way, in our opinion, again, leading to fewer side effects and safety concerns, as well as faster onset of activity. That's what people need. They need drugs that work faster, and that they don't have to worry about becoming addicted or sedative or cognitively impaired. Right now, we still have a significant cash runway through almost to the end of next year, if not through the end of next year, and a team on board that's done this over and over. So again, as we move forward onto our pipeline, we're encouraged by the progress that we've made, where we stand as a late-stage clinical development company that's focused on immensely problematic neuropsychiatric disorders. PH94B, the lead nasal spray candidate, is for social anxiety disorder. We'll go into that in a bit, unpack what it is and why it's a big problem without many solutions. Adjustment disorder is a disorder that we've seen rise in prevalence as a result of COVID. It relates to the impact on your life from a trauma or a series of traumas that really didn't affect you before, but now are affecting people in ways that impairs their ability to function. Major depressive disorder, that's depression. It's significant, and these are disorders really that radically shift the way people live their lives. And unfortunately, it doesn't allow them in many cases to function in the ideal version of what they see for themselves. AV101 is an oral drug that is potentially indicated for what we call CNS, or central nervous system disorders. Everything we do is within the central nervous system. We say neuropsychiatry because it does relate to anxiety and depression disorders, do obviously relate to psychiatry. Let's talk now a little bit about social anxiety disorder and PH94B for that indication. This is a highly prevalent and very serious mental health condition. Over 10% of the US is affected by this disorder, 21 million people at last count. And it's marked by a debilitating fear and avoidance of what many of us consider common everyday situations, social and performance-related situations, as simple as going to your neighbor's house for a barbecue, as complex as giving a presentation to your colleagues, but also any situation where there are people or performance obligations involved. It's a fear of judgment, of humiliation, of embarrassment, and it's so severe that it causes people to typically avoid these situations, or in the context of trying to perform in them, really struggle. And it's a chronic indication. Typically, when we say indication, that just means disorder. Typical onset is usually in adolescence, and the duration of the disorder is often decades. So it's typically related to a trauma that then has long-standing impacts. Social media is a big player into this, team orientation in the workplace and academic settings. Again, situations where people fear being embarrassed or humiliated. So as I noted, it's a large indication. Today, about 5 million people of the 21 million people, or 25 million people, are treated. But they're treated with old school antidepressants. And a lot of times that is for their depression, where social anxiety is also on board with the depression. So they're comorbid, they're co-disorders. What we see, though, is a lot of people, you see here, 7 million people are diagnosed with social anxiety disorder, but not treated. And the reason for that is they don't like the options. So they need new options. They don't want an antidepressant on board in their body. There are only 3 drugs approved, as I'll show you in a minute, for social anxiety disorder, and they're all antidepressants. But they cause a lot of side effects. Social anxiety disorder is episodic. It doesn't happen all day, every day. It happens as in sometimes predictable ways, other times unpredictable situations. But those folks are in significant need, and they're simply making a choice not to take what's available. And we think the prevalence is growing overall as people become more aware of what this disorder actually is. It's not just medicalized shyness. It's a significant medical condition that affects their life in many ways. We'll see more people come under diagnosis. Couple of decades since anything's been approved, and you see here basically the prevalence has been increasing steadily year after year after year. And unfortunately, the medicines for social anxiety disorder have not changed. Current standard of care consists of 3 approved drugs. They're all old school antidepressants, excuse me, Paxil, Zoloft, Effexor. Again, these are everyday medicines that, regardless of whether you have a social anxiety episode, you're dealing with the side effects and the safety concerns of those drugs. Off-label prescriptions, which are permitted in the US, occur often from benzodiazepines or benzos, drugs like Ativan and Valium and Xanax. And unfortunately, as you see here, there's significant risks. Even the FDA has put out drug safety communications warning about the potential in this benzo epidemic that we have for becoming addicted to drugs like that. And unfortunately, that's a safety concern that just has to go away. People need to be able to take a medicine. They don't have to worry about becoming addicted or cognitively impaired. So that's our mission with PH94B. We see this drug maybe like you would see a rescue inhaler for asthma, a drug that you can use on demand, a nasal spray that does not have the side effects and the safety concerns or the abuse liability potential. We got FDA feedback on that in April that they don't see any reason to believe our drug has abuse liability potential, which is a significant attribute for a drug that you want to be using for a psychiatric disorder. It's designed, again, to be used as needed right up front of either a predictable or unpredictable trigger, anxiety-provoking situation. The onset is about 15 minutes. The duration of the effect that we've seen in studies to date is about 90 minutes, 60 to 90 minutes. And it's designed to be able to be used multiple times a day because people have different types of anxiety-provoking situations with this disorder throughout the course of a day. You may in the morning have a meeting, you may have a social engagement in the evening, 2 distinct types of anxiety-provoking situations. So the ability to be able to use a drug multiple times in a day is important. A benzo, for example, while it may have onset in about 30 minutes, it's the duration of that effect is going to be significant through the course of a day. And many people I speak with have had experience with benzos, so they are well aware that they could potentially impair functioning during that period of time, and then chronic use could lead to addiction. The drug is in phase 3 development, and we have FDA fast track designation. So we're very excited about the potential of PH94B to really shift totally the treatment paradigm for social anxiety disorder. Just a minute, while I know this is technical, but we'll go through it very quickly in the limited time allowed. But the key to us with this drug is it's sprayed directly onto the receptors that are in the nose. They're right in the middle of the nose, the nasal septum. And when the drug drops directly on top of those receptors at microgram doses, not even a single milligram, an Advil is 200 milligrams, we're talking about microgram levels. So very small amount applied directly onto these receptors of cells that are in the nasal passage, kick them into gear. And they basically send a series of neurotransmissions from the nose directly to the part of the brain that's associated with fear and anxiety. It's called the limbic amygdala. And that's the part of the brain that, again, controls the fear and anxiety impulses that we have. So what's necessary in an anxiety-provoking situation is to calm that part of the brain down, to inhibit the activity in that part of the brain that's overactive and causes the anxiety or the panic or whatever the anxiety-related disorder is. So it's these fear-off neurons, we call them, that ultimately what happens is there's a broadcast effect. It goes from the nose to what we call an interneuron right at the base of the brain, and that projects into the brain, sends a signal that says, calm down. And those receptors then are, the neurons in the brain are then inhibited from that kind of a overactive state. Decreasing that activity results in the anxiety calming situation or scenario that we're looking for here. Just a couple of studies we'll talk about very quickly in the time permitted. We've significant phase 2 data that brought us into phase 3. 2 different studies. One was done in a laboratory setting where people were provoked with a topic that they had to give a 5-minute speech on shortly after they were given the drug. And on the other side of that study, and the study was run by Dr. Michael Leibowitz, who's really the Babe Ruth of social anxiety disorder. He innovated the Leibowitz Social Anxiety Scale, which is what's used to support the 3 drugs approved for social anxiety disorder, or SAD. And so this study was highly statistically significant, and it led us to structure a phase 3 program around this and another study as well that supports our confidence in the drug. I won't go into these data too much because we don't have a lot of time, but there's a lot of information we can provide to you, specific technical detail on these programs and these studies. If you're interested, you can contact our IR department. But the key point is the drug is in phase 3. One study that we've completed did not hit its primary endpoint. That was a study that was done during COVID. And unfortunately, the impact of COVID really impacted the ability to execute and scale up that study design in a way that we think warranted the kind of outcome that we saw in phase 2 from the phase 3 study. It happens in psychiatry. It's part of the reason why we're where we are right now in the market. I think it was a significant overreaction, but so be it. The market has its own opinions. Our opinion is the biological activity of this drug is significant. And as a result of what we've seen, and again, even the second study that showed when the drug was used in the real world, when people were allowed to take it as they needed it, as compared to in the phase 3 study, it was one single administration after being provoked and told that they had to give a speech. So when used over even just a couple of weeks, what we see is using the Leibowitz Social Anxiety Scale that was supportive of the 3 approvals, the drug's significant, and its impact is dramatic in terms of the reduction in the severity of social anxiety disorder and the symptoms associated with it. What we find coming out of that and using this scale is that people feared events less often. and they were anxious about their events less often over time. As we reported recently in our large study that was done on an open label basis, people got better after 1 month, even better after 2 months, and even better than that after 3 months. What we're measuring in that type of environment, again, is are they avoiding previously troubling and anxiety-provoking situations less frequently? Are they less anxious and less fearful of those situations? And what we saw using the Leibowitz scale, which we think is the most appropriate scale, we weren't allowed to do this kind of a real-world study during COVID because the FDA didn't want us to be putting people out into the world and exposing them to stressors while the rest of the world was sheltered in place by regulation. So we did the laboratory-based study, which only allowed a single administration, and as a result, you don't get the fair read on how we think the drug benefits people in a real-world, everyday life setting. And that's the way the drug will be used in the real world on the other side of approval if we're able to study the drug successfully with the Leibowitz scale as the main endpoint. So more on that you'll see in our public disclosures as time goes forward. But very importantly, again, as I noted in our last conference call, we've just seen tremendous success. Even people that didn't succeed in the single administration phase 3 study that fell short got better when they transitioned into the longer term open label study where they were allowed to use the drug over months and were assessed for efficacy using the Leibowitz scale. So that's what we'll be going back to the FDA shortly to request that we do the remainder of phase 3 in a different manner, where the phase 3 study is in a real world setting where we get multiple measurements from multiple administrations over time, which is how we see the drug benefiting people on a long-term basis. Other opportunities for PH94B, again, it's for anxiety disorders. So I mentioned adjustment disorder as a result of COVID. We have phase 2A data coming out in the first quarter related to this disorder. We've seen significant potential across some other range of anxiety disorders, PTSD, procedural anxiety, people fearful of going into a dentist office or getting a blood draw, a vaccine, an MRI. It's a significant indication where people need rapid onset anxiety relief that doesn't knock them out for the rest of the day like a benzo could. Postpartum anxiety, new moms typically are not wanting to take drugs that could possibly be passed to their child if they're breastfeeding. So our drug does not go through the whole body. It's a very important feature. It's non-systemic and non-sedating and non-addictive, which is a very important advance on the field. And then panic disorder, of course, makes sense. People don't want to get on an airplane. They don't want to engage in certain situations. We see the drug's potential there as well. The rapid onset is key. The fact that it doesn't go through the whole body is key. It goes for about 3 inches from the nose to the brain. And the broadcast network that accomplishes that is very simple. So across a range of disorders, but the main focus for us at the moment, social anxiety disorder. I'm running pretty short on time, so I'll go quickly through the second asset, PH10. PH10 is similar to PH94B in that it's a nasal spray that's administered in the nose, right on the same types of receptors. The key difference is that once it gets to the part of the brain, the amygdala, it does different things. For antidepressant purposes, you want a stimulatory effect. So there are neurons in the amygdala and other parts of the brain that when PH10 broadcasts through that same interneuron, what's called the olfactory bulb, the opposite effect is achieved at the end of the line, and that is that there's an increase in the fear on neurons. These are stimulatory neurons. These are antidepressant-oriented neurons. And what we've seen in the phase 2 study that's been completed, phase 2A, which has encouraged us to go into phase 2B, and we just got FDA fast track designation for PH10 in major depressive disorder, is that we saw very rapid onset. Your current antidepressants, first of all, about a 1 in 3 shot of them working if you're taking them for the first time. And unfortunately, it's a rinse and repeat process where even after 4 or 5 or 6 different tries, you still have about a third of the population, creeping up on 20 million in the US, that don't get any response from their antidepressants, even though they have to deal with the side effects associated with those medications. So with PH10, what we saw in this, it's a small study, it's a proof of concept study, but it's in human patients, is that after only a few days, we started to see a benefit, an antidepressant effect that was sustained over 8 weeks in this study. And without the types of side effects and safety concerns that you see with either ketamine therapy or even the existing and approved antidepressants. So no drug-drug interaction issues, no sexual dysfunction, no insomnia, no types of side effects that really affect your day-to-day life. So we're excited about, again, the potential profile of PH10 that's emerged so far is a rapid onset standalone drug that can be used for major depressive disorder without bringing the baggage of drugs that are often used for rapid onset effect, like ketamine. You'll get a rapid onset effect with low-dose IV ketamine, but you'll also have to wrestle with the psychological side effects, hallucinations, dissociation, blood pressure issues. So we're trying to avoid all those things. This, just like PH10 or 94B, it's maybe a benzo without the baggage because it's rapid onset with all the benzodiazepine effects. PH10 is similar to, say, a ketamine without the baggage, rapid onset but without safety issues. And those are key hallmarks for commercial success and penetration into these markets that are massive. To be successful in those areas, people need drugs that work well and don't cause disruptions to their life with side effects and safety concerns that they have to worry about more so than the underlying condition. So as we move forward, again, we'll go through a small U.S. phase 1 study to bring this into the U.S., which we have just successfully optimized the formulation. That study will be done in the first quarter of 23, and then ideally moving into phase 2B development, building on the success from phase 2A, and a larger study that will, again, try to demonstrate that PH10 has potential to work quickly and safely for people struggling with major depressive disorder. Other indications beyond MDD, treatment-resistant depression, postpartum depression, same reasons there as postpartum anxiety for new moms. And then again, suicidal ideation, tremendous problem. People worry and think about suicide at increasing rates in this country for fairly obvious reasons related to what's happening in our world, but we need to have medicines that people can take to knock down those thoughts and behaviors associated with suicide, but do so rapidly, very rapidly, before something negative occurs on the other side of that behavior. Briefly, AV101, the third drug candidate for the company, is an oral drug. It's not a nasal spray. The pherines that we're developing, these are neuroactive steroids, first in class, nobody's doing them. AV101 is an oral drug that focuses on what's called the NMDA receptor. And there are several abnormalities that are associated with that receptor and that channel not functioning properly. So AV101 is directed at trying to, again, be kind of a kinder and gentler version of the drugs in that space, not causing the side effects and safety concerns, but delivering the potential therapeutic punch. So to wrap, we have a mission. And we have drug candidates with multiple shots on goal to accomplish that mission. And as to really radically change the way that mental health is dealt with in this country. There's always a need for talk therapy. That's never going to go away, but we need medications that can complement effectively that type of talk therapy without causing the patient to have to wait around for some sort of signal of a benefit, and without having the patient and the payer and the caregiver worry that there are side effects and safety concerns they've got to barricade around while waiting for that kind of a therapeutic benefit. We're a company that's got multiple assets in the pipeline, a really expertise team driving these CNS indications. 23 is exciting in that we will be in phase 3. Again, with PH94B, with the study design that we think fits perfectly with the way we think the drug works. And the Babe Ruth of social anxiety disorder is the principal investigator in that study, using the scale that's been accepted by the FDA for the 3 approved products in that disorder. and by the guy who innovated that very scale and was involved in those registration studies. So we're excited about the team and the prospects of the assets that we've got. And luckily in this market, we don't need to raise capital to achieve some of these catalysts that we see going forward. So with that, I think that's it, Mark. If we have any questions, I think we have a couple minutes that we can answer a few of them.
Yeah, we have a few questions that have come in. First question is from Chip, who's asking, how long lasting is a dose of PH94B and how quickly does it take effect?
Those are great questions. The hallmark is rapid onset. When we say that, it's dramatically rapid onset. We've seen in the phase 2 studies onset within about 15 minutes. And that was because in the public speaking study, where the drug was given to people 15 minutes before they were told they had 2 minutes to get ready for a 5-minute speech or a 5-minute meet and greet with a group of strangers or before a group of strangers, we saw highly statistically significant results there within that window. The duration of the effect seems to be about 90 minutes at tops, so 60 to 90 minutes. What we found is when people get into a particular situation with requisite calm, they do okay. It's that period up front, just like with an asthma attack and a rescue inhaler or a migraine drug. The key is getting into that zone right up front of the particular event. And with the flexibility to use it up to 4 times a day, even if it's necessary, say you have a long all-day conference or an all-day meeting, you want to be able to re-up if you need to at some point after a break or before you resume that meeting. So 15 minutes on the onset, maybe 20, and then 60 to 90 minutes for the duration of effect, and the ability to use it up to 4 times a day based on current data that we've got.
Okay. Next question comes from Edgar, who's asking, are you working with any partners or academic institutions for your 3 drugs under development?
Absolutely. That's profiled well on our website. We have a partner for commercializing PH94B in Asian countries, but the clinical advisory team that we've got around both or really all of the assets in the pipeline it's outstanding. Jerry Sanacora from Yale and depression, Maurizio Fava from Harvard on both depression and anxiety disorders. I mentioned Dr. Michael Leibowitz, whose roots are out of Columbia in New York. Michael, again, the leading clinician, I think, in the world around social anxiety disorder. Dr. Tom Loughran, former director of the FDA's Division of Psychiatry, which is the division we deal with for anxiety and depression activity. So Sanjay Matthew out of Baylor, very close contact with Veterans Administration and veteran hospitals. Sanjay especially in depression, suicidal ideation. So yes, absolutely essential to be successful in our space. And these are longstanding relationships. So they're very, that's why it's helpful when you have key opinion leaders and clinicians and scientists and doctors who understand the way your drug works, and industry experts that have spent careers focusing on biological activity of promising drug candidates. It gives us the kind of confidence that we need to do the things that we do. And in particular, the decisions that we make about study designs and about indications of interest to pursue where we know there's unmet medical needs out there. So very helpful team.
Looks like we have time for one last question from Bob, who's asking, what are your key milestones for 2023?
We're going to hit 23 hard. First, we have some data that we'd like to be able to share on the open label study sometime in the first quarter, where, again, like I mentioned, in the real world setting, where people were able to use the drug at their house and in their daily lives over a period of time, we saw the kind of results that we think are concordant with the potential of the drug. People got better. They feared things less and they avoided things less often. So we'll put those data out from the open label study. We have our adjustment disorder study that's reading out in the first quarter. We expect to be with the FDA to get a clearly defined plan for the remainder of our phase 3 development of PH94B. and then try to get into a mode where those studies get started during the course of 23. With depression, PH10 will finish our first US-based study. Even though we've done a phase 2A study ex-US, the first US study will be completed in the first quarter, and then moving into phase 2B into the second quarter. So plenty of activity across the pipeline, and potentially also in the collaborative arena.
And we're at the time.
Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your focus and your interest, and certainly follow up with Mark Flather and our IR team if you have any additional questions or like additional information on what we're doing here at Vistagen. And